Disappointed but not surprised is pretty much how I feel after every committee hearing in Indiana when they are considering a new piece of legislation. Today is no different. This morning, the House Committee on Veterans Affairs and Public Safety considered HB 1393, a bill relating to immigration reporting by local law enforcement agencies. This bill did pass out of committee 9-2, going back to the full House. Representatives Cash and Linkler were the only two that voted against it. So, of course, I am disappointed, but I am not surprised. This bill was amended. The original language said law enforcement had to report to ICE if they suspected someone was undocumented. That language has now been updated to probable cause relating to a misdemeanor or a felony. So if someone has been arrested relating to a misdemeanor or a felony and the law enforcement agency or officer has probable cause to believe they are undocumented, that is when they are required to report it to ICE. There were a couple of talking points that stood out to me, but I wanted to touch on a procedural thing that happened. There were 5 bills that were being heard by this committee today. Bill 1393 was number 3 on the docket, but when the committee got to that bill, they actually skipped it and went right on to HB 1413 because of the number of people that showed up to testify. And it kind of seemed like maybe they were seeing if these people who came to testify would leave, if they made them wait a little bit longer. I don't know, that's just my hunch, but there were a lot of people who got up to testify against this bill. I think there was only 1 or 2 testimonies in support of this bill. So let's go over some of the key talking points. Racial profiling is obviously a huge concern when it comes to a piece of legislation like this. Anytime someone talks about an immigrant being undocumented, the picture that comes into our head is generally not a white person. If you have a Hispanic sounding last name, you are going to be much more likely to be racially profiled, or for officers to assume that maybe you are not in the country legally. Lawmakers did not even tackle this issue at all. They acted as if they were super offended that anybody would even suggest that racial profiling is an issue, because what? But duh, y'all, racial profiling is a huge issue in policing in general. We can't pretend that it doesn't exist. And they really kind of just ignored this issue like, not really their problem. The open borders talking point came up a lot, especially from Representative Jim Lucas. This idea of open borders that is the fault of the Biden administration is really just a political talking point. There is no truth in saying we have open borders, but that is what he kept referencing back to. And he kept saying this is what the state of Indiana has to do because of this open borders policy of the last 4 years, like almost as if Indiana's hands are tied. They have to act because the federal government is doing nothing. So that was really just a lot of political rhetoric, not relating specifically to the text of the bill. But that takes me into my third point here. The conflict between federal responsibilities and state and local responsibilities were also talked about quite a bit. Federal policy on immigration is not the state's responsibility nor the local responsibility. And there is a lot of conflict when it comes to deputizing local and state law enforcement officers to be agents of the federal government, to be agents of ICE. That question also was not really answered by any of the legislators, but it was brought up a couple of times, especially from the ACLU executive director in Indiana, who spoke about there should be a separation between executive powers and state and local powers. So that is my takeaway today about HB 1393. I am so glad so many people showed up to testify against this bill. It is not passed yet. It is not a foregone conclusion yet. There are still opportunities for you to influence your legislator. So please go to iga.in.gov and let them know how you feel about this kind of bill.